Hey everybody, I'm Chef Tom with atbbq.com, and today on Tips and Techniques, I'm going to show you how to make a cheap steak taste great. So if you're looking to cook a steak on a budget, there's a few things that you can do to elevate those cheaper cuts. Let's get into it. Now, I don't necessarily recommend this, but what I did is I went to the store and I bought the cheapest steaks that they had available. These happen to be labeled as sirloin tip steaks. They were $5.28 a pound. So that's pretty cheap. They look not great, to be honest with you, but we're gonna try and make them taste good. So these are completely uneven in size, which, whatever. I guess when you're not paying a premium, that's what you get. What I'm doing though is I'm taking off some of this thick, like silver skin stuff that you don't really want to chew on. We're just gonna get rid of any of that around the outside. There's a little bit more here. And then what we're gonna do from here is we're gonna start preparing this to actually have some flavor to it. Now, for no other reason than it bothers me that these are so mismatched in size, I'm gonna cut this big one in half so these are all relatively the same size. The first thing that we can do to actually impart some extra flavor on these and to tenderize them is to give them a dry brine. So we're gonna take some kosher sea salt, cover the surface, and we're gonna let these sit overnight. Remember, I said this is gonna take some time and some effort in order to make them tender and flavorful. And this is part of that. So what dry brining is gonna do is that salt is gonna start to open up the pores on the outside, pull some of the moisture out, and then it kind of all melts back in. So you end up getting this salt flavor all the way through to the center of the steak rather than just right on the surface of the meat. So these are just gonna go into a zip top bag. You wanna do at least a few hours, but overnight is best. So these are two steaks sized obviously differently. Again, cheap steaks, not always gonna be super consistent, but I started dry brining these last night. You can see some of that liquid that's come out, but a lot of that's been sucked back into here. Now the thing about this now is that the outside's really salty. So what I'm gonna do is go rinse this off so that we can still put a little bit of steak rub on here. Now that we've rinsed off all that salt off the surface, what's left in here is just what's in the center, which is awesome because you're gonna be able to taste that flavor all the way in the middle. And that allows us the opportunity to put a little bit of extra flavor on the outside. So today we're using the Yoder Smokers beef rub. We're not going super heavy because again, dry brined, we don't need a ton of salt. We're gonna be grilling these steaks on the Yoder Smokers YS640S pellet grill. It's set up for direct grilling, but this is the second step of making a cheap steak taste good. We're gonna butter baste this baby. So going over the direct flame, got a 12-inch steel skillet that's been preheating in here. Add a couple tablespoons of butter and about a tablespoon of olive oil as well, just for that flavor. And we're gonna bump up the flavor by throwing in some fresh herbs and some crushed garlic. We've got thyme, which is one of my favorite herbs, but you could use whatever kind of herbs you love. Throw some rosemary in there, whatever you got, oregano. Next, we're gonna throw down our steaks. So while these things kind of get a sear on them, get some nice color on them, there's also the fat that's working through there. And then as some of the fat starts to work its way out of these fatty parts of the beef, also gonna get that rendering. And then once we get this going, we're gonna start basting that fat over the top. So we're putting flavor and fat back into the meat. So now we've let these get a head start on the sear. We're gonna start spooning this hot butter over the top of the steak. So now it's also kind of cooking from the top down, but more importantly, adding a lot of flavor back into the meat. Getting a little bit more of those juices coming out now, going right back over the top. Just check out the bottom and see how our sear is going. Oh yeah, so nice color around those edges there. Again, we're talking about a cheap steak. This isn't gonna look like the perfect steak, but it certainly doesn't look bad. It certainly doesn't smell bad. So step 3 in making sure that you can enjoy a cheap steak is cooking it to the proper internal temperature. So when we temp this, we're gonna go for the coolest spot we can find, and we're aiming for about 125 to finish this off, and we're almost there. And this is part of the reason why we've never closed the lid today. We're not closing the lid because if we did, we'd trap in the heat and we'd overcook these steaks before we got any color on the outside of them. So I always recommend leave that door open until you need to bring up the internal temperature, and then you can close it. But we're not even gonna get there today. Now we've got this steak rested for about 5 minutes to make sure all those juices redistribute evenly. I'm gonna give you my 4th tip here on how to make a cheap steak tender and tasty, and that's to slice it thin. The shorter the meat fibers are, the less chewy it's gonna come off, even if it's already a chewy cut of beef. And then you've got all of these juices and this butter left down below the steak that are gonna add so much flavor. That's almost as good as a quality strip steak right there. It took way more work, but it's delicious and it's flavored all the way to the center. You're not just getting the steak rub on the outside, there's salt all the way in the middle thanks to the dry brine. The tenderness is not gonna match a prime cut of strip steak. Certainly not a filet, but it's not chewy. Cooking it to the proper doneness helps a lot, and then cutting it thin. So if we go back through all of these things, the first thing we did was dry brine. That adds flavor all the way to the middle. The second thing we did was add a bunch more flavor by butter basting while it cooks. The third thing was cooking it to the proper finishing temperature, about 125. And then lastly, we slice it nice and thin to cut down those meat fibers. The bonus is all of that flavor that comes in the form of the juices and the butter that were already in the pan, and now you can dip it through there. And now you're enjoying a steak that you only paid $5.28 for per pound versus probably $12 to $15 a pound for the nicer stuff. Not bad. Well, thank you guys so much for watching. Be sure to check out atbbq.com for all the products featured in today's video. If you enjoy the recipe, hit that subscribe button. And if you have any questions or comments, or there's anything you'd like to see me cook, let me know in the comment section down below, and let's be good to one another. For more recipes, tips, and techniques, head over to atbbq.com/thesauce. All things barbecue, where barbecue legends are made.